WWE's two premier brands have always been Raw and Smackdown. Raw started in 1993 while Smackdown came along in 1999. Since both these shows started, they've taken on many forms, they've seen their fair share of huge angles, superstars, and at times, they've seen some pretty dry periods as well. These two shows are staples of WWE programming and everyone has a side. Either you're Team Red and stick with Raw, or you bleed blue and Smackdown is your show of choice. Raw has always been the more sports entertainment show of the two, while Smackdown focuses more on the in-ring side of things, while still providing its fair share of character development. I'm going to talk about both these shows heading into WrestleMania 37, and maybe later in the year we'll try this again and see where both these brands stand. Let's start off with Friday Night Smackdown. Friday Night Smackdown got into a high gear when Roman Reigns came back at SummerSlam 2020. I really think that was the turning point. Roman Reigns' change in character brought a fresh feel to Smackdown. The guy felt like a legitimate top star, and now everything has formed around him. Look at a guy like Apollo Crews. The guy was around for about 5 years with no sense of direction and no character. He was simply a guy who had potential and great wrestling ability, but he didn't have a character. Now that he's in this gimmick where he's respecting his Nigerian heritage, it feels cool to see because we have seen someone new in the mid-card, and that person is actually somewhat interesting. Speaking of the mid-card, SmackDown has a great mid-card. Aside from guys like Apollo, there's Big E, who's been on a tear since he was drafted to SmackDown. When Big E was in the New Day, he wasn't focused on being serious and he was considered a comedy character. He's now changed that and blended his fun-loving character with a serious side, which displays his athleticism. This has led him to his second Intercontinental Championship. Then you have a guy like Sami Zayn, who ever since he returned feels like he actually has a direction for the first time in his career. The documentary conspiracy gimmick isn't for everyone, but Sami Zayn makes it work, so much so that he got Logan Paul to appear on SmackDown. You go through that mid-card and there's so much great talent. Guys like Cesaro and Nakamura are becoming regulars after sitting on the sidelines for so long. Moving into the women's division, there's Sasha Banks, who's finally gotten an opportunity to shine with a long women's title run. When her and Bayley broke up, their storyline was great, and they didn't make the mistake of having them latched onto each other like they do with these feuds sometimes, where they just go on forever and ever. Bianca Bellaire getting drafted from Raw to SmackDown also adds a new wrinkle, as she's someone who WWE is building as a top woman star for years to come. The tag team division is there, but it still needs work. I look at the Street Profits as the real workhorses in that division, but the rest of the teams just kind of feel a bit thrown together. Then you bring it back around to the top with Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns' presence in WWE has been amazing, and I've hammered that point home a lot. He's in the prime of his career, and SmackDown feels huge with the biggest star in professional wrestling on their show. Then you have Edge, who has felt great since his return. I have a lot of respect for a quote-unquote part-timer who actually shows up quite a lot. The storyline with Edge and Roman did become quite convoluted, but I feel like they're doing the best with what they can. It's nice to see Edge competing on the blue brand, and not just that, but he's there weekly and he genuinely makes you believe in what he's doing. SmackDown on a weekly basis produces a great show which doesn't feel like it drags at many points. At some points there is filler, but that happens with each show. On Friday nights when you sit down and watch SmackDown, storylines are actually progressing and new characters are developing before our eyes. Veteran characters are there to help elevate new people so they can become future stars and take their place. Now let's talk about Raw. I'm gonna get this out of the way right away. One of the biggest problems I have with Raw is the supernatural storylines. I'm someone who enjoys stories in wrestling, and while I understand that there is a place for supernatural stuff in wrestling, I don't think it's working on Raw. I mentioned before that Raw was the place you go to get the entertainment side of sports entertainment. But in years past, that's always been an over-the-top angle, not whatever's happening here. Randy Orton and The Fiend have been going at each other for months now, and I feel like it's just dragging on. At this point, hopefully WrestleMania will be the last time these two see each other, because I think I speak for a lot of people when I say this needs to end. They have Alexa Bliss dressed up as a 12-year-old swinging on a swing set for I don't even know what reason. Looking at the Raw roster, I'm actually going to start off with Sheamus. Sheamus was a guy a few years ago who had an aching body, so much so that he had to form a team with Cesaro to get him through matches. Now in 2021, he looks like a reinvented man. I genuinely believe that Sheamus is on one of the greatest runs of his career. He's been putting on great matches with Drew McIntyre and even had a solid one with Riddle a little while ago. He's been one of the bright spots on Raw. Seeing a veteran like that have a great run towards the end of his career is always great to see. Speaking of veterans, that brings me to MVP. When MVP came back in 2020, I didn't make much of it. I loved the guy growing up, but I thought it would just be a one-off appearance. MVP single-handedly changed the career of Bobby Lashley. He brought out a new vicious side that we hadn't seen of him before, and with that, he took Cedric Alexander and Shelton Benjamin under his wing too. When the Hurt Business formed, they legitimately felt like a top stable, and I thought that big things would be on the way for the group. Unfortunately, Vince McMahon's hatred of stables brought them to an end, and it really is a shame. I feel like Shelton and Cedric were just getting on a roll as they'd put on some amazing matches with the New Day. Bobby Lashley as WWE Champion feels long overdue and not a touch out of place. I really hope we get to see something between Brock Lesnar and Bobby Lashley sometime this year. Then there's a guy like Drew McIntyre, and look, a lot of people have soured on Drew McIntyre because they have seen a lot of him in the past year, but I'm not in that group. I genuinely think that Drew McIntyre on Raw has been great. He's one of the very few babyfaces that don't make all those dumb babyface mistakes. When Drew McIntyre speaks, you listen to what he has to say. He brings the intensity and he brings relevance to whatever he does, not to mention he has been putting on some fantastic matches as well. That brings me to the women's division, and look, Raw's women's division is not the greatest. Ever since the women's division became a bigger deal, we've seen somewhat of a pattern. The same person is used over and over until WWE fans get sour. Raw's women's division features the likes of Charlotte Flair, Asuka, and the recently acquired Rhea Ripley. Asuka's championship run has felt pretty boring in my opinion. Not a whole lot has happened, and that really isn't her fault. I feel like it's time to make Rhea Ripley a top woman star and push her as far as you can. She's shown what she can do in NXT, and if they let her be like that on Raw, WWE has another megastar on their hands. Raw's women's division misses Becky Lynch, especially when the biggest star in women's wrestling is on Smackdown, that being Sasha Banks. Having Bad Bunny come into Raw is great. The guy does numbers for WWE on YouTube, and it's nice to see them getting back into pop culture. The problem with Raw is that it's just too long. Imagine seeing everything you see on Raw, but having it for 2 hours. That would remove a lot of the filler from the show and make it more palatable. All the times they have Elias come in and do something random like a concert or a random women tag team match, it wouldn't be there because there's less time to fill. I think when I parallel these two shows, I see Smackdown as the far much more appealing show. In fact, Smackdown's filler is way less than Raw. Smackdown feels like it has a legitimate mid-card. When you tune into Smackdown, you see character development. You see guys who have been there for a while like Cesaro and Nakamura actually in prominent positions. You see Apollo Crews and Big E continue to develop their characters. You see guys like Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens putting on great matches wherever they are on the card, and overall, you just see a brand that's using their talents properly, or at least giving them something to do rather than just sit in the back. If we parallel this with Raw's mid-card, what mid-card? Seriously, what mid-card? There's Sheamus, Riddle, Elias, Braun Strowman sometimes I guess, but who else? When's the last time it felt like someone was legitimately being used to their abilities and their characters were growing? It's just a bunch of filler matches and veterans come in and start random rivalries. So I'm gonna give the mid-card grade to Smackdown. Now let's parallel Smackdown and Raw's women's division. Both these divisions have a few stars and then basically everyone else, and for their sake, let's hope everyone else starts to get used. SmackDown's women's champion is currently Sasha Banks. Sasha Banks during her current run has been great. She's had great matches with Bayley and she's even pulled great matches out of Carmella. And now she's on course to deliver another solid match with Bianca Bellaire at WrestleMania. Over on the Raw women's side, I think having Rhea Ripley come in is great. Like I said before, if they just let her be a monster and tear through everyone, they have a megastar on their hands. Asuka's Raw Women's Championship run has felt pretty stagnant to me. I can't even remember the last time she defended it, to be quite honest with you. Raw has basically been a revolving door of the same people coming in to challenge over and over, but SmackDown isn't much different. The attention paid to both women's divisions is much the same, but I'm gonna give the edge to Smackdown here. I chose Smackdown because Sasha Banks' Smackdown Women's Championship run has been great, and I really hope it continues because she's at her best when she's playing a heel. Lastly, let's move over to the main event scene. On Raw, Bobby Lashley and Drew McIntyre are occupying the main event scene. Seeing Drew McIntyre consistently in the main event has become normal, but Bobby Lashley feels like he deserves to be there. Lashley is an imposing figure, and it's great to see how far he's come considering he was in a storyline with Rusev and Lana just a few years ago. But that being said, as WWE Champion, I don't feel like Bobby Lashley possesses the same aura around him as SmackDown's champion does. Roman Reigns commands the show. When he's around, you listen. There's just something interesting to what he's selling. Having Edge in the main event picture only brings back memories of days past, and it's a great redemption story too, because Edge was never supposed to be in this position. Those two combined make me give the edge to SmackDown once again. There's just something more interesting about SmackDown, and I just can't put my finger on it. I know some people might think it's biased, but I've taken a lot of factors into consideration here. One thing that stuck out to me is Raw's roster is clearly lacking. Calling up someone like Karrion Kross or Finn Balor from NXT would bring a new feel to Raw because it just feels a bit stagnant and it feels like there's a lot of holes on that roster. Overall, at this point, the more enjoyable show is SmackDown. SmackDown is the connoisseur's choice when it comes to wrestling products. There's a fresh feel, the storylines make sense, characters are developing every week, we're seeing great matches, and the show doesn't drag much. That's it for this one, guys. I wanted to kind of take a look at these two brands and parallel them because I've been watching SmackDown a lot of late and everything has flowed pretty well. Last week I even noticed that everything on the show had a payoff or built to something for WrestleMania, whereas stuff on Raw is okay, but it could benefit from a couple more roster members to spice things up. Let me know any video suggestions you have down below in the comments, and I will see you all in the next one.